Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Certified Forgotten, the horror film podcast that brings you movies with 10 or fewer reviews on Rotten Tomatoes. That's our limit. It might be, if you haven't listened to an episode in a couple of weeks, that's a new limit. We used to do 5. Unfortunately, Rotten Tomatoes has caught up with us, so we had to expand that a little bit, and who knows, maybe in a year we'll have to expand it again. Damn them for bringing all their historical archived interviews and reviews up onto the website. Really making life hard for the little podcasters out here. I am one half of your Matt hosts. As always, I'm Matt Monagle. I am here to bring you undiscovered horror, and my partner in crime, Matt Donato, is taking a break from award season, festival season, shop talk, all kinds of crazy stuff. You're busy. You're busy, Donato.
I am busy, yes, but it's a good busy. It's a happy busy. We can't really complain about things like South by Southwest and Critics' Choice. These are happy little work adventures we go on. So it's all positive. Oscars were last night. Shit happened. I beat Perry in our pick'em little bet we had going. So it's coming up to Donato pretty across the board there.
I like it, and I feel like today is going to be a return to classic form. For the movie that we're talking about. This is vintage Donato, vintage film festival, low budge indie horror. This is if you're still kind of getting your feet back under you after a little bit of travel and festivities, this is going to be a good grounding experience, I think.
Well, I mean, this is actually a film I've wanted to get on the podcast, and it didn't fit our 5 review criteria. So we're already just really jumping right back into the fact that now that we've made it the 10 reviews, the world has just been like blown open. Like, we have so many more movies we can pick from, and these movies that, like, the Monster Project means so much to me because it was one of those first little indies that, like, put me on to the fact that, hey, you can do huge things with $200,000. It's just that nobody's paying attention, which I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about. So
yeah,
I don't know.
save it for the show, man. What are you doing? You're giving away gold here in the cold open.
Listen, my other joke was the way you saying, as always, I'm Matt Monagle, and I was going to be like, wait, it'd be weird if you were Matt Donato this episode, but like, yeah, I brought some real facts this time.
All right, I appreciate that. Well, here to bring you this movie and gift you with the opportunity to talk about it, we've got a very special guest. Donato, introductions, please, if you will.
Absolutely. I am very happy to welcome DeVaughn Taylor, that you know from the Bloody Blunt Cinema Club podcast. And I'm just really happy to have DeVaughn here and finally bringing the Monster Project to us. So welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I am super excited. It was one of those things that I had the hardest time finding one that was under 5 when you originally invited me, and then it was literally months. And then once I listened, I finally heard an episode where it was like, "Oh, we're doing 10 now," and I was like, "Okay, I got it now." So like I'm locked and loaded.
Yeah, I think you even mentioned the Monster Project like the first time too. You were
Yeah,
just like,
yeah, I
like the
did.
Monster Project is right there. And I was like, oh my God, it is right there. And I really want to talk about it. God damn it. Like, we need to fix this.
I think it was like 6 or 7 reviews. So like it was right there on the cusp.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because sometimes in the pre-days, the before times where we used to do 5, Donato would come in and he'd be like, what if I just delisted my review, right? Like, what if I just went on to Rotten Tomatoes? I'm one of the 6. What if I just took my review down? Then we're at 5 and we're good to go. I was like, I don't think that's a way to run a freelance career or a business, bud.
I mean, though, that was Mutant Blast, actually. Mutant Blast, when we covered it, we said the rule was it fit for 5 because I was the 6th review. And I was just like, you know what? We need to cover it. Take my review off. Just ignore it.
That's fair enough. Well, DeVaughn, I'm really excited to have you on the show today. And when we were talking a little bit before, you were saying it's been a while since you've had to kind of do like the history of you and your history with the genre. So I'm going to put you right on the spot, right? For starters, the first question we always ask our guests is their earliest memories of the horror genre, their earliest memories of a film, a book, some kind of scary media that they took in and kind of what that experience was like. So you got to flash all the way back right from the get-go.
Yeah, so I mean, I got in pretty early. Like, I mean, I started watching horror movies when I was like 7. Like, I think that was whenever I was first shown Nightmare on Elm Street. And but before that though, I do remember whenever because this movie came out in 1999, so I would have been like 4 or 5 at the time of this memory. I remember we had a family night and they had rented the House on Haunted Hill remake, and they were watching that, and it was like, I remember it was like super late at night, and like, and they thought I was sleeping, And then so I like, was kind of watching. I remember like seeing something. I mean, I was just terrified. Like it was just like, like when you just wake up and something scary is already happening and you're like out of it. So it was like, oh my God, what is going on? And I remember my uncle gave me a pair of fake vampire teeth, those like little plastic ones. And then he was like, here, put these in. He was like, now you're gonna be scarier than anything that's on the TV. And then like, and I remember something about that. Because my uncle and my mom were the two that like kind of led me down the spooky paths. So I do always remember that like little memory about um whenever whenever I then wasn't as afraid to like watch horror movies, I would kind of approach it with that thing like of kind of like, real life or, is going to be scarier than anything that I'm going to see on this TV.
Mm.
And that's kind of what kind of sparked my interest to be able to explore those fears in a safe manner, I think.
Well, also you set yourself up for success starting with a Dark Castle Entertainment remake because,
Mm-hmm.
as we all know, I at least myself am a huge appreciator of the 13 Ghosts and the House on Haunted Hill remake. So you set up for success right there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I definitely was introduced in a good way. I mean, I'm a big 13 Teen Ghost fan. I think that's like the longest podcast episode on Blade Blunts. Actually, is the 13 Ghosts episode.
Well, let me ask you then, because we talk to a lot of people on this podcast who probably, when we talk about their childhood and horror, that was probably like late '80s, early '90s. So their formative experiences were like now considered kind of the golden era of the genre, right? Like late '80s horror,
Mm-hmm.
peak John Carpenter, things of that nature. When we talk about late '90s, early 2000s horror, we tend to talk about that as sort of a dead period within the genre. The
Mm-hmm.
kind of, it was a bridging this period of like '90s, early '90s innovation to like the deluge of festivals and VOD films that would come in the later 2000s. So, how did it feel to kind of be developing as a horror fan, finding you're like, ooh, I've got these plastic teeth. I think I can do the genre. Finding that in an era where like a lot of people, when you hear conversations about it, are like, man, that was like the worst period of horror. Did you feel that at the time, or did you find a bunch of stuff you were rediscovering?
A little bit, because so two factors into that kind of affected things were, so my mom, she was the horror movie person. We'd watch horror movies together, but it was only when dad was at work, because my dad absolutely hates horror movies. Like he
Mm,
thinks they are the scum of the earth. He trashes every single one of them. We've literally gotten into arguments now because like of how much he hates it, like doesn't give certain movies a chance. So it was like I had a limited window when we could watch them. And then I have a lot of siblings. I had three younger sisters, and so when we go to the video store, we were only allotted a certain selection, and since there were the three girls, my horror movies were usually outvoted. So I didn't even get
right.
to like rent the newer ones. So like my horror education was still going pretty much, it was going to my uncle's, VHS DVD stack and then kind of going through his movies and going through there. So like I did still kind of start with like a lot of the stuff in the 80s and 90s, especially like 90s stuff really appealed to me a little bit more because it was a little bit more weird and out there. I always describe 90s horror as like the cocaine era, where it was just like,
Mm-hmm.
what can we do right now? All right, first idea, do it. So it's like, those movies definitely kind of stood out to me as well. But so I did still kind of have more of a formal education, I suppose, as far as like chronological goes, but because I wasn't really hearing about a lot of the newer stuff, or like wasn't getting to see the newer stuff. So it wasn't until like kind of the early um 2010s whenever I started writing, and I had a podcast like back in like 2013. And once I started doing that stuff, that's whenever I kind of got into the loop. And then so really the early 2000s, like the aughts, were kind of like a blind spot period for me, because like I just
Mm.
wasn't able to see a lot of the stuff coming out that time.
I feel like that era, like for everyone, was kind of a blind spot in a way, though. Even if you were living through it, like I didn't really engage that much with horror at that time, and like now looking back on it, it's all these movies I feel like I'm catching up on, and like that I quote unquote missed. But like again, that's kind of where the podcast came from. All these movies that like critics kind of shit on in the early 2000s, and all the movies that like I'll still be forever mad at all the horror remakes from the early 2000s that have like 20%, 30% on Rotten Tomatoes, and you just look back going like, did critics just really hate horror that much at the time? Like, yeah, it was a really weird time.
They did. It did seem just like a shit fest on horror movies. Like every time I heard of a new horror movie coming out, it was just everybody talked about how
Mhm.
bad it was, or like it just immediately shit on it. I still don't forgive a friend on my birthday. The choices were between seeing, I wanted to see Dead Silence, and he wanted to see X-Men the Last Stand, which, don't get me wrong, I still love X-Men 3, but then like I didn't see Dead Silence until like 4 years later, and then I was like, what? This movie rips. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, and I feel like part of that too is, I was thinking about this with regards to the zombie genre, and I don't remember why the other day, but there was some zombie movie that came out. I was watching a trailer for something, and I realized that we don't actually know what zombie movies are good. And by the sense that we don't know what zombie movies are good, I mean like the canon for this decade of zombie films has not been written. So in 20 years, when the next generation of critics is coming, they're going to be like, here are the really good zombie movies from the 2010s and 2020s. Here are the bad ones. And we're going to be like, wait. No, we lived through that. Nobody watched that. That movie was terrible. Or like, no, that movie was great. Why is it on the other thing? So there's an element of that, I think, backward looking canon building that is still just now really taking place for the 2000s. It's only been the last few years, I think, that movies like Dead Silence have kind of got to the point where people are like, all right, no, time out. We're going to reclaim the reputation of this movie. It's good. And now it's considered part of like the good 2000s films. It wasn't that way for a long time.
Yeah. I mean, I just watched Cherry Falls last night, and I swear if that came out now, people would lose
Mm-hmm.
their shit for that movie. Like, oh my God, it's so good.
Yeah, well, I mean, like Dead Silence too. It's a funny one to bring up because when I wrote, like one of the first big swings I took at Slash Film when I started writing there was writing an in defense of Dead Silence, and it was for like I forget what year anniversary, but it was like one of the kind of like earlier pieces out there to be like, yo, no, this movie is actually very good, and you're all like kind of sleeping on it. And then like Lee Whannell like tweets at me, he's like, I'm really glad you like it because boy, like I hated making that movie. like even like the filmmakers kind of have like this really dark kind of reaction to it because like I'm sure, of course, as much as like Whannell and James Wan put everything into it, and like I'm sure they love it on some kind of level. Like I just remember Whannell like tweeting back and forth, just being like, "No, like seriously, totally, I'm glad you like it. Just like I never want to like go back to that period again because it was so hated and he was so sour on the experience because of the reception." Like again, I feel like there were a lot of filmmakers that got caught in that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure, like, Lee Whannell getting out of it and making everything he's made since is like a tremendous thing. But there's so many filmmakers I wonder who were met with bad reception in like that time of
Hmm.
horror and just kind of like gave it up, maybe.
Yeah. Who did we lose?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, DeVaughn, you were talking about starting a podcast in 2013 ish. Talk a little bit about kind of I guess the middle age, right? High school, college age when you were connecting to horror. Was that something you were kind of pursuing? Were you like, I want to make movies, I want to write about movies, I want to talk about movies?
Yeah, it was a progression because yeah, one like that was when I still had to explain to people what a podcast was.
Mm.
Like podcasts that hadn't made that like big boom back, and I sometimes think back to I'm like, man, if I would just kept that show going, like I'd be on like episode like 400 by now.
You would
Um,
be famous just because you were one of the oldest people doing it at that point.
exactly, I'd be the Adam Carolla of
Yep.
horror podcasts. But my
I'm
first
sorry.
one, my first one actually wasn't a horror podcast. It was like an all around, just like movie centric. Because at the time, I wasn't the horror guy yet. Like I'd always loved
Hmm.
horror movies, but it was around after that time because I went to college for art education and I went for 2 years, and then I had to drop out for various circumstances. And following that year, I had like just a catastrophic year. I had to drop out of college. Then, like a few months later, had a house fire. My whole DVD collection was stolen. So, like, it was like it was a just whirlwind of a year. And that's at the time. And then I had dropped out, and I was like, all right, so like, what am I gonna do for like my career now? Like, I thought this is what I was gonna do. And it was still around that time when, they told you in school that like if you want to be an adult, you gotta go to college and, do all the things. So I had that worry, but then it was once I started finding YouTube channels and like that were doing movie reviews and doing these after show type things. That's whenever I was like, oh, so there is like opportunities to be able to like loop in something. I love movies that also like, oh, I don't necessarily need to like get a degree and like have all this training to do. And so I started doing YouTube stuff around that time as well. Didn't really stick with it, but and then that's whenever I started writing for a few websites. And then those websites, I would be the only one that wanted to do the horror movies. So then I became just like kind of the horror guy, and then my film watching just like kind of zoned into that as well, because I was so obsessed with 'cause around that time, that was when I saw It Follows, and that I always cite
Mhm.
that as the movie that kind of switched something in my brain about the horror genre, like on like what its possibilities were from a storytelling perspective, um for an experience as well, just all the versatility. And at that time, I had been writing for a little bit, and then I was like, you know what? I was like, writing about movies is cool, but like, I think I want to like make them myself. So that's why I started learning. I started teaching myself like videography and how to write scripts and editing and stuff like that. And I've been just kind of self-taught in that ever since. And then Bloody Blunt Cinema Club came because I finally was like, I want a horror centric podcast for me as my new identity as horror guy.
Mhm. What what do you find, because the I feel like, and I don't have any interest in creating, so I'm always sort of interested when I talk to people that do. I feel like this is a really good time to be sort of self-taught, right? The barriers to entry to be able to go out and make stuff, put together a reel, put together some shorts, things of that nature. It's easier now than it's ever been. Is that
Mm-hmm.
sort of a narrative that Hollywood sells you that I'm buying into, or is that something you've experienced, that those doors are more open?
No, I mean, I think it's the times have definitely shifted in a way to, yeah, it is kind of the best time to be a self-made, self-taught type of person. As far as, going against like, the idea that like, okay, this is the one path that you take to get to here, that you go to film school, you do all these things. I mean, I feel, since I've moved to LA about 3.5 years ago, like I moved out here with a lot of people that I would have graduated college with if I would have stayed in, and they were like, most of them are actors and such, and they're out here with me doing the exact same stuff I'm doing. They have their degrees, I don't, and I mean, I'm almost doing some more of getting the experience of like the hands-on stuff of working on sets and like things like that. So it's like
Hmm.
it more was just like a confirmation. Like I kind of had that idea before moving out here, like because I thought that 4 or 5 years ago that I was like, this is a really good time to be self-taught and to be able to have an opportunity. And I do still feel that way, confirmed, years later.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, even like the big filmmakers and stuff like that are starting to do things that are affirming that, and Soderbergh shooting on iPhones and all these like
Hmm.
filmmakers proving that, like, listen, the technology is out there, and like, yes, of course, you're still gonna get something different from a Soderbergh iPhone movie like Unsane. He still has a tremendous studio behind him and a budget and all that stuff, but like, just like showcasing that the tool is there, and like, the iPhone's just the way they can capture video now, and the way they can capture like all these different kind of cinematography moves is like, it's kind of bonkers. It is. It's like
Yeah.
to look at it from an outsider perspective. And again, I'm like Monocle. I have no desire like to create myself. I just like the criticism side of things. But like, I don't know if I did want to. It's just like that I'm holding a device right now that could possibly get it done. I'm like, geez, that's kind of weird times.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's wild, and especially, when you're trying to do like filmmaking and horror, because horror has always been that, you know, low budget, kind of resourceful, unorthodox way of filming, for most of its history, that it lends itself super, well to the way that things are kind of being made today.
Yeah, and I always like to, I mean, not to be the old guy in the room on TikTok, but I will say that like some of the best short form storytelling, horror storytelling that I see today is coming out of TikTok. It's coming out from teenagers and 20 somethings that are just like using their phone and teaching themselves how to edit together different scenes, right? And like
Hmm.
learning how to put in a jump scare, or learning how to create this really crazy sense of existential dread out of like a good story that they're trying to tell. And it's just, I if I were a Hollywood producer, all I would do is basically be like, go follow the horror hashtag on TikTok, and send me a list of the best stuff you see every single day. And we'll schedule lunch or something, or have a Zoom call with the people that are those creators. Because yeah, like even the YouTube generation, and even people that were doing stuff 10 years ago, I feel like I've seen so many more people that I wish I could greenlight projects based on things I see on TikTok, because it's just such a dynamic platform for storytelling.
Yeah, and again, horror's always been that way, so now that it's always been that way, and like think of like, the way that people were able to stretch dollars then, and then think of the way they can stretch dollars now, like the possibilities are just like, it's mind-boggling, but it's exciting.
Mm-hmm. Now, you talked a bit about Bloody Bunce Cinema Club. I want to, for those that aren't familiar with it, I want to kind of have you talk a little bit more about kind of the impetus for that, and the way that you approach film on that podcast, and kind of, there's a lot of horror podcasts out there. So kind of what is the thing that makes yours distinct and special and gets you excited about doing it day in and day out?
Yeah, so the podcast, I did start it in the early months of when we were in lockdown, and I
Mm,
mean, I'd always been wanting to do it, and I'd done a podcast before, so it's like wasn't a stretch or anything. But as far as what I wanted to bring to it that was different is, we basically like to like analyze subgenres and franchises, and we kind of alternate month by month on what we do. And because me, as somebody that one is an aspiring filmmaker, and I like to look at the way that things are kind of made up, and like seeing like what makes certain things work, what makes them not work. And I love patterns. Like that's just
mhm,
something about me in general. I just really love patterns. So I love, taking a look at something like, say specifically like vampire movies or something, like, okay, what makes specifically a vampire movie successful? And that's kind of the way that we look at it, whether it's a subgenre or a franchise. And I'm a big stoner.
mm,
I smoke weed all day, every day. And I feel like it does, in a way, it definitely affects the way that I look at movies. Maybe I come at it from a different angle than you wouldn't really think of. I'm known to make big stretches and reaches on things whenever I'm like kind of analyzing, because I'm somebody that, like, as much as like, yes, whatever is put in front of you um in the film, and like whatever's written, even if it is written out as plain as day, like what the director is trying to tell you, I still like to look at movies and be like, okay, but what does the movie tell me specifically, like not what you're
mhm,
wanting to say, if that makes sense. So I'm very much a once art leaves the artist, then it's kind of no longer theirs. And I try to take that literally whenever I analyze things. I'm like, no, this is my movie, so this is what I think is actually going on.
Well, I think that's important, to criticism in a way, because having all those different voices and having everyone's different interpretation is what keeps things fresh and keeps these new opinions coming out. So it's like, the same movie that's being analyzed week in, week out by so many people. Like, if everyone has the same take, it's just obvious. Like, it's so boring. It'd be so boring after a while. So like,
Hmm.
we need that kind of
mhm,
approach, to the sense that we're all allowed to still hold our own opinions and read things in certain ways, because I have watched movies myself that, like, if I didn't watch them after certain elements of my life, and like, you know a decade can pass and a movie can completely alter its meaning. So it's like, to
Yeah.
always have that like creativity and like that curiosity, I think that's very, very important to have, like, in criticism.
Yeah, my favorite films, or some of my favorite films, are ones that I hated, and then I went back and revisited, and I was like, I think I was wrong. I think you were good the whole time, and I think I was being kind of stupid.
Oh yeah, I'm a big rewatcher. I know there's a lot of people that don't rewatch movies, or like not that often. Like I love, like, especially being able to find a movie that I can like sit there and watch like 5 times. Like one of my favorite movies, The Neon Demon. I remember the very first time I saw it, I rated it 3.5 out of 5, and had all these different things with it, and like it just like kept creeping up every time I'd watch it, and I'd pick a little bit more out of it, and then a little something else, and I'd be like, oh, here's a whole completely spin I never thought of. And just like kind of, I love whenever I can grow to appreciate a movie like as time goes by.
Hmm. Now, DeVaughn, I want to ask one thing. You were talking about your approach, especially the perspective that marijuana brings to it, which for our listeners that are in California, hey, for our listeners in Texas and
E-
elsewhere, ooh, just legally. I mean, whatever, travel where you want, vacation where you want to travel. Um, talking about the author relinquishing kind of interpretation and control to the audience, which I am also a really big fan of, it is something that I feel like is a little, it's led to different conversations now in 2022 with the sense of entitlement we sometimes feel for audiences and the way that they have taken it to say, not only do I get to interpret the decisions that you made previously, I also get to determine the future of the work or future edits or sequels or things of that nature. So we've talked a little bit about this. I think Donato and I are considerably less doom and gloom about the state of audiences and fan culture than a lot of other folks out there. But I'm kind of curious too how you see that, especially in the horror communities you travel in. Do you feel like audiences are taking care of the stuff they've been gifted with, or do you think that there's a little bit of that my precious approach that they take to some of these films and some of these properties?
It's weird because like I said, I do believe in that like, the audience like kind of owns at that point. But at the same time, it's you got to understand that you own it with everybody. It's not just like you own it anymore, and I think that's what gets some of these some of these fandoms that are a little bit more excitable than others, because they're like, yes, this is my precious thing, but they don't think about it in a whole context that you're sharing it with millions of other people as well. So it's like yeah, I do think that we do kind of take that as it's being released, but at the same time it's like you gotta still be open to like that it's malleable, like this is that it's Play-Doh, not clay,
Right.
like you can take and still reform it and it still be that thing, it's not hardened.
It is funny to hear just like some of the takes of just like you're saying, it has to be communal, it has to be shared, like all these opinions and stuff like that. But there are the people out there that like they go through all these mental gymnastics to come up with their own thought, and like they clearly have taken the Play-Doh and molded it to the shape they want. And then when anyone else does that, it's like, yeah, but like you're completely wrong. And it's like, wait, don't you understand the hypocrisy going on here?
Exactly.
I don't ever want to be like, if I am your expert on something, if I am the last word on a movie, God help the movie and the cast and the crew, right? Like, I don't want that. I want to be a voice in a conversation. And nothing makes me happier than when I think I know something about a movie and somebody changes my mind, right? Like, I'm like, oh, here's what I thought about it. And somebody's like, I don't think you thought it all the way through. My instinct in those situations is not to get defensive, but be like, oh, what did I miss? Let's have coffee. Let's get a drink. Let's talk about it a little bit more. Because, part of the reason why I run a podcast is because I'm very, not bad, but I'm much better about thinking when I get to do it with other people. That I really rely on that give and take in order to help solidify my own ideas, because otherwise I just kind of go down a little bit of a dead end on my own. So I love the ability for me to say something and then the guest says something and I'm like, oh shit, that's right. And then Donato says something, I'm like, oh shit, that's also right. And then I want to respond to that. That's just, it's so much more fun. And I don't understand why people in the industry wouldn't want that experience.
Oh yeah. Like I joke around that I call myself a reverse gatekeeper. Like I want everything, I want to take everything in, like everything is acceptable. Like, yes, everything is a yes. Like I'm one of those people, especially like, going into my podcast is like, I try to make excuses for like anything that can be a horror movie. Like I'm that person when people try to argue against like, oh, it's not a horror movie, I'm like, oh, but if you look, it definitely could be. If you look close enough, anything can be a horror movie. So like that's how I try to approach it.
It's a horror comedy. That doesn't mean it's horror. Rah, rah, rah. Yeah, nope.
I like it. I'm gonna think of you as the yes and of horror film criticism from here on out. I really like that.
That's what I'm trying to. What is there like? And I feel like that's just my stoner brain too. What would be a reverse gatekeeper? Like what's a person that lets people indoors? I don't know.
Yeah,
greeter. You're like the Walmart greeter for the hard.
Yeah. I think that's probably the closest parallel I can think of.
Just really happy, stoned, and welcome, happy to be here.
That's perfect.
You're going to check receipts on the way out the door if you're like the Costco greeter, but it's not a bad thing. You just want to make sure the experience lined up with what you were looking for. So
that is perfect, because the movie we're talking would definitely be in the Walmart bin for sure.
And you know what? Thank you for that, because that is probably one of the best segues we've had in a very long time to talk about today's movie. So we're going to take a short little break. And when we come back, DeVaughn has brought us The Monster Project and Donato's excited. We'll be back in just a second. Hello, friends. Thank you for listening to this episode of Certified Forgotten. This is the time on the show where we like to share a few words from our loyal patrons, and they make us say some things, explain some things, talk about some things that we usually have some fun with. So, what do we have this week, Donato?
This week, and number one, I didn't check my microphone, so I really hope it's reading correctly. So
Sounds
we're gonna do
good
this
to me.
one awesome, willy-nilly. The first is from Christy, who is new to the $10 tier, so this is the first time Christy is putting in for this. But Christy has an easy question. If you could add Paddington to any movie or TV show, which would you choose?
Well, my guilty confession is I haven't seen either of the Paddington movies because I don't like Joy. But knowing what I do about the visual artist on Twitter that keeps adding Paddington to a different movie still every day until he forgets or gets bored, I would say Adam to the New Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That was like the that was the instigator for that. Blend those two memes and bring them together, and it's Paddington and Leatherface. Let's go.
I'm gonna say a sitcom scenario like Community, where someone like Joel McHale's character, or God forbid Chevy Chase's character when he was still on Community, has to get a talking to from Paddington multiple times. I think that's the dynamic I would add Paddington to for me.
Could be like one of those memes, remember, where they're like, if you had to show that you would replace everyone but the main character with a Muppet, or just the main character with a Muppet, just take a show and swap out the main character for Paddington, see how it goes. I'm going to say 24 because we were just talking about Keith Sutherland off camera. So 24, but Paddington plays Jack Bauer. I got it.
I was gonna say Paddington's like the guy on the computer or something of that nature, and it's just in Kiefer's ear the whole time, just talking him through missions, trying to
either Kiefer is Paddington or literally every other character. You got Paddington terrorists, Paddington psychops, folks. It's great.
That's a can of worms that we can open on another day. All right, we have another question from this one comes from Nathaniel. Thank you, Nathaniel. What's a dormant movie or television series that you would like to see updated, continued, or rebooted?
This is easy. The Prophecy. I mean, hopefully I don't need to explain this to anybody else, and it did have a pretty good run, and even I haven't gotten all the way to the end of the line with it. But yeah, give it a contemporary director a crack at the Prophecy franchise. Get some war between the angels in heaven and devil creepy goth shit on planet Earth. I think that could be a really fun goth kind of film, and I think we're probably getting into far enough along into the nostalgia cycle where goth will become in vogue again. Mid 90s feels about right, so 30 years out. So yeah, let's do a Prophecy. How about you?
I think I'm gonna go more selfish because I think there are properties that deserve it more, but for me, I've really been craving another journey back into Cabin into the Woods territory. And I know a sequel was kind of teased for a little bit, and we saw the wipeable board, we saw all the monsters and the cages and all that stuff. So like, we know there are so many scenarios going on at so many times, and I'm not even saying we just have to do the same thing again with different monsters, but something that explores the corporation more, explores more of that universe, I think would really be a venture that I'd be willing to take. And I think Cabin in the Woods itself has amassed enough fan base where that would be a pretty viable sequel to go out there with.
And it feels appropriate for you to say that on this particular episode too. Nice bit of parallel connections there between the Monster Project and Cabin in the Woods. Lots of monsters, lots of cameras. I dig it.
Maybe they're locked in as the monsters in the cages. Who knows? Crossovers are forever.
Bear this in mind for when it becomes Matt Donato, Hollywood producer. All right. Thank you again for listening. We're going to get right back to the show. So let's go. All right, welcome back. Today on the show, we are talking about The Monster Project. And let me tell you a little bit about the film, sort of an expectation setting here. So The Monster Project is a 2017 found footage horror film directed by Victor, I'm going to say Mathau, Walter Matthau, seems right to me, Victor Mathau. In the film, a group of young filmmakers, including a YouTube influencer, an aspiring director, and a recovering drug addict, put out a casting call on Craigslist in order to interview real monsters in Los Angeles, movies about Los Angeles. What a coincidence. The three people who answer the call claim to be a vampire, a demon, and a skinwalker, or werewolf. But as the night goes on, the group learns that their claims to the supernatural may not be as far-fetched as they thought. So this began life. This is actually a very, very early Kickstarter film. This began life as a Kickstarter movie way back in March of 2013. It successfully raised $20,000 in April of that year, but it would actually take them 4 years for the cast and crew to finish the project. It became fully wrapped in January 2017, was sold and distributed shortly thereafter. And while it probably does not get as much note as the Zach Braff movies of the world, this is a Kickstarter movie success story from a time when that was still something that would make the front page of Wired magazine or Polygon, if Polygon was even around. I don't know when it started. Those kind of things. And that makes it a film that is going to have a very fun legacy to talk about on the show. So let's start, DeVaughn, with you. You talked about this being something you wanted to do even before you thought you were going to be able to do it. What makes this a movie that kind of sticks with you and endures for so long?
Man, so I love found footage movies quite a bit. It's definitely one of my favorite subgenres. And it started off because I used to, for one of the websites I used to write for, I did a editorial every month called Stoner's Corner, where I would highlight a movie that would be enhanced if you were to indulge in the substances. And this was one of those movies. I just kind of sought it out, and in why it was kind of hard for me to find a movie to like for this podcast to begin with, like not to like sound like that I don't watch quote unquote bad movies, but I don't watch as many like smaller movies as I should. Like I'm up to date on indies and stuff, but like not like the like super indies, kind of like this. And found footage is always a subgenre that I'll take a chance on in those circumstances, because there's so much creativity that can go into a found footage movie. And it kind of sucks, it was very saturated for a hot minute, so it's kind of hard to like sift through it. But now that's kind of calmed down a little bit. We kind of get a more steady stream of really interesting found footage movies, and using it in more creative ways than when they were kind of popular more in the early 2010s, of just kind of shake the camera a little bit, let's do this. And like there's a lot more creativity in the reasons, and interweaving it into the story more than previously. So this one's just really fun. It takes a very silly premise, and like, yeah, the writing and acting isn't the greatest, but one thing that I do want from a found footage movie is like there has to be a very steep escalation, like because found footage movies, you kind of ground the film a little bit, as if it's a little bit more real, which means if you're going to do that, I want this movie to just go batshit crazy in the third act. And boy, does this movie do that. It gives us everything in this finale. And I absolutely love its audacity for that. And it's very creative for the budget. We get some really good effects in there for some of these monster designs and some of these set pieces. It's one of those ones that's like you'll be almost wanting to kind of give up maybe by your 35 minutes in. You're like, this movie's kind of but then once it gets going, you're happy you stayed on board.
Yeah, we'll come back to that 35-40 minute mark, because gosh, that rang true. Donato, I don't want to hold you back anymore. I want to let you gush. So gush away, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, this for me is not to repeat anything DeVaughn said, because I agree with everything of that. He nailed it. And I also, too, am a found footage fan. It is a subgenre that is near and dear to me. And what I like about found footage is more the sense of you can do these grounded stories and you can really bring the audience like face to face with fear. That's the thing that I always keep going back to, is like I really think found footage, when it is done correct, is some of the scariest ways of bringing bringing horror to audiences. So like when you have a really good found footage movie that can bring you face to face with the devil and like bring you face to face with whatever is trying to happen, like you can't look away from that. Like the camera doesn't give you any kind of break from the horror. And I think the Monster Project does that pretty well. Also, it does something a little more unprecedented, because if we look back on the Blair Witch, Paranormal Activity, like the films that started the kind of found footage kickoff where everyone was trying to copy it, they saw ghost stories and they saw how easy it was to do little cheap paranormal effects. And those were the copycats over and over. Every cheap
Mm-hmm.
found footage movie that came after that, they were trying to do the, oh, like, we don't actually have a monster here, we just have a guy off camera like shutting some doors and like opening some windows. But the Monster Project is like, no, we're going to give you a creature feature, but we're going to do it in found footage, which again is like, Cloverfield pulled it off, but Cloverfield was a massive movie that was able to like use millions and millions of dollars to create a massive New York kaiju film in found footage. And like the Monster Project saying, no, we're going to do a creature feature. We're going to bring all the monsters in that you mentioned, Monocle, and we're going to do it in a way that 100% feels like you're walking through a Halloween Horror Nights maze or like some kind of like entertainment attraction maze, but it's never cheap and it's never done in a way that feels like you're not in the moment. Like you feel locked in with these monsters in the Monster Project. So it's like this little miracle of a movie that's barely $200,000, $250,000, I think is the budget, but it plays as well as so many multi-million-dollar films. I'm not going to say Cloverfield, but some of those mid-tier indie found footage films that get talked about so much. I think the Monster Project like stands right next to them like so proudly. Like DeVaughn said, the effects, like the costumes and the way the monsters look, the creature design is great. So it like still little money, but it plays like quadruple at like quintuple to the size.
Yeah, and the special effects were done by noted Hollywood special effects artist Jim Benke, who has worked on films like The Craft and Lady in the Water. He worked on the Men in Black movies, cut his teeth on the original Swamp Thing television series, not the movie, but the television series. So in interviews, the director Victor Mathau says that the reason why they have a film is because the Kickstarter had been up for 6 months, and Jim Benke was like, "Hey, I like what you're working with. Let me get involved." And suddenly that $20,000 in Kickstarted funds turned into accredited, but it doesn't have a citation on Wikipedia, but $250,000 is a final budget. And yeah, I mean, it's one of the, when you have somebody, do I wish that 80s and 90s special effects artists would never go backwards in terms of budget? Yeah, I'd love to see them continue to go upwards in terms of trajectory, but bringing somebody to the table who knows how to do this on a grand scope and scale does make a pretty big difference for the way these creatures look.
I mean, it's wild for how small of a budget that this movie has. Like, this has a top 3 like werewolf for me in this film, Skinwalker. Like the stages that we get from it too, like it's not like we just get like kind of flashes of it or flashes of any of the designs. This movie isn't afraid to show you what it's working with. Like it's not trying to do like keep it off camera and like do it only in like distances and shadows. Like no, they're putting the monsters in our face and like really showing off the work, and it's incredible.
And I think it also gets away with it a little more than other films because it's doing the night vision mode for a lot of the chaotic action. Once, for anyone listening, if you have not seen the film yet, there is a lead up that Monocle describes. And finally, the crew gets to the house. The monsters come in as interview subjects and they all get locked in together. And like the third act plus a little bit of the second act is just these monsters hunting the crew throughout this house, and they are isolated and they can't get out. So like it just becomes a hunt and chase film between a skinwalker, like a J horror demon, and a vampire tattoo artist, and the crew is just running scared the whole time. But it is the night vision, so like you do get the green overlay, but that overlay makes those effects kind of look a little better because you're not noticing all these little intricate details. And the film uses its budget, and it knows it doesn't have the budget to pull off some really kind of like daylight effects, but they use found footage like in such a clever way that you don't need it. Like you use found footage in a way that sells the exact movie you're trying to sell, and it covers up quote unquote like blemishes, I guess to say.
Yeah, I have from my writing, I've never been much of an academic writer. I've always kind of done the more fun articles and kind of silly stuff and like kind of stretches. But my one claim to fame that makes me do feel a little academic is Dr. Rebecca McKendry on she has a podcast as well, but she teaches classes out here in California, and used one of my articles in her found footage section, because I wrote a article about like the reasons to use found footage. Like pretty much broke it down as like using it for authenticity, amplifying the fear, giving a sense of urgency, and is using the found footage like purposeful, and like does it add like style to the film. Like those like 5 main things, and it's like if you kind of go down that list, like the Monster Project checks off like all those things because it's using the medium like for what it's intended for, to like, you know, to have this very specific style and purpose on like, why is somebody filming this to begin with? Is there somebody that's going to put this footage together later, and why would they do that, and who's going to be watching it? You kind of meant, you guys kind of mentioned some of this, and I was listening to the Poughkeepsie tapes episode earlier, and you know, if you have all those things, then like, you know, you're using the medium like purposefully. And I mean, especially with like, you know, the sense of urgency in this movie, like once the chase gets going, like you said, like it feels just like every time they like escape one thing, they look to one door and then the other monster's there, and then it's like, okay, we beat this monster, let's get out of here, but oh, we got to go back in because we left Jamal in there and we got to go back for Jamal. So it's like all these reasons that keep them just running around this house Scooby-Doo style just makes sense.
So let me ask Monagle very quickly, because you have made it known already that the first 40-ish minutes you're ready to abandon. Does the second half kind of pull you back in a way that makes you happy that you stayed?
First, let me say that I was mad for about 35 minutes of this movie, which is, and this is not the first time that this has happened on the show. No. This has become like a weird reoccurring thing. Is like, I think Donato, I think you like payoff movies. And so I think a lot of the movies where you're like, oh, this is great, like it's backloaded, not front loaded. And I tend to be the opposite. I tend to prefer front loaded films. So you were like, oh, I love this movie, I'm so glad DeVaughn picked it. And I was watching it, I was like, God damn it, Donato, not again. You picked another thing that and because the first bit of it, it's like, I was telling my wife, I got like MTV Undressed vibes from a lot of it. It's just sort of like not great character romance triangle stuff. And you begin to, when I say not great, you really begin to appreciate what these actors are bringing to the table once the shit hits the fan. They're very good at sort of the physical component of acting. They're very good at maintaining fear and being interesting and engaging. So I actually came around on the cast quite a bit. But that first little, like, here's how we all got here bit was excruciating for me. And then, you know, to the points that both of you have made, the turning point was when they started doing the scary stuff, but they didn't do it off camera. When they were basically like, here's a vampire attack, here's our werewolf attack. It's happening directly point blank in front of the camera. We're not cutting away. We're not hiding. There's nobody with a, you know, fishing wire in the corner of the room that's just like pulling stuff. We're like, we're going to live and die by how well you go with this. And it's a very action. There's like shades of the highest compliment I could pay. Some of the way that this is put together, some of the stunts and fight choreography and the way this thing came together. There's shades of Aliens. There's shades of the colonial Marines down in the trenches with their, you know, their little webcams as they're getting picked off one by one. There are times where it has that same sort of clarity and momentum and sense of direction. And yeah, that got me in the end. It's and of course the end, which we'll talk about in a little bit here, like who doesn't gravitate towards a kicker like that?
And that's what I'm saying. Like it has to, because I'm not a payoff person typically either. Like I'm not usually a big slow burn person. But if I'm gonna do it, the payoff has to be proportional. So like you said, like we have like 30 minutes of like, okay, we're doing a lot of character stuff, and it's kind of just like we're doing things like, okay, if it's gonna be that slow, then that means you have to go that much bigger.
That's actually a great point, and this is like me and Monagle argue a lot actually, talking about like payoffs, and I do need that payoff to be exactly as long as your buildup was. And I think that's where like Monagle and I differ, because something like Saint Maud and like just going right out with Saint Maud and just cool. It's like fine. It's a movie that I still like. Do not get me wrong. But when your payoff is 2 seconds at the end of a movie, like that, literally you can blink and miss. Like that is not proportional to what you have given me before that. Like if you're going to slow burn me, just like the Monster Project does, like, okay, slow burn me for 40 minutes and then unleash unholy hell for 40 minutes. Like they literally do that. So like they know that what you're waiting around for, and they know what you're there to see. And again, Monagle, like, that's a great point. They don't do it off camera. They do it in your face. And if we're going to compare things too, like I really bring up Afflicted, the vampire movie. That's another like first person, but they kind of get more action friendly and they go into like the hardcore Henry realm. So you get these sequences, I think, like too, like hardcore Henry, where the vampire jumps on one of the characters and they smash through at least like 1 or 2 floors. Like the wood boards are just rotted, so they just smash through it. And like it's a great effect where it does look like they're just falling through the house on top of one another, just like toppling and then crashing down and still fighting. And that is something, again, that does not look like it should be in a $200,000 $250,000 movie. Like that is a top tier effect. That is a top tier stunt choreography kind of thing. And like they pull it off and it looks perfect. Like there's no blemishes on that one. Like especially like it's crazy.
Oh, I was just saying, like, yeah, the way they use the location is really impressive. Like, whoever found this house that I'm assuming they just like got permission to just like destroy the shit out of. Kudos to them because like they're the real MVP of this movie.
Yeah. And I think that sense of like having a space like that works really well for the film because it's weird. I had Deadstream bouncing around in the back of my head while I was watching it because Donato and I just saw that at South by. It's going to come out this year, hopefully at some point. Shudder. It's coming out on Shudder
Yeah.
in not too long. People watch it. It's great. I had that bouncing around in my head a little bit in terms of the way they use the indoor stuff. But the scene that sold me on this movie was actually the birthday party for Evan that they have at the beginning of the movie, which is just sort of like you're like, oh, okay, thank you. Yep. Friendship is tough, right? I got you there. They pay that off by him having kind of like an out of body ghost experience when he's in the haunted house.
Yeah.
And the way that they did the scares in that with like the crowd that is frozen and then looking and then gone, it's such easy in camera stuff, but it's like it requires a degree of we're going to get this right, like commitment to the bit in order to make it work. And they had so many of those little moments in that inner ghost sequence that like that's what sold me on the movie. When they did that haunting sequence at the making him relive his birthday party, where the ghost is like whispering at him, it had strong video game logic, right? Like that was a sequence from a video game where you're playing something and like you hear it's like the darkness where the character's like making you relive something and whispering in your ear. It was inventive and it was dynamic and it was just good. And after that point, I was like, all right, movie, the worst you're going to get from me is a mixed review because you've really knocked it out of the park with this.
Yeah, you can totally feel the effort that was put in. Like, a lot of the times, I think that's what found footage gets a bad rap is, they assume that people made it found footage because, out of necessity or because they thought it would be easy, they thought it'd be cheap. And like that they're not gonna like really put the effort in, but like you definitely don't see that with this movie like at all. Like you feel that they put in the effort to be like, okay, let's switch up the scares, like let's use this entire location like to the most that we can, like, and even doing that with the dream sequence that they probably filmed. They probably filmed that dream sequence right after they filmed the party sequence to like save time and save setups. So it's like that they are putting so much effort behind it.
And to your point to that, I've seen, I'm sure we've all seen so many like, direct to streaming or direct to whatever found footage films that do exactly what you're saying. They don't put the effort in. They go, oh, good, we have a camera and we have a cheap way to fool people into thinking this is like another paranormal activity. And like, for them to embrace the creature feature aspect of it and to really like dare themselves to go full into it and dare themselves to be like, no, we're showing everything. I think of a film like there's this movie called like Tape 407. I think it was renamed and released, but it's literally about a flight that crash lands and there's a velociraptor hunting them. Like there's no logic behind it, but like
Sure.
They tried to do a found footage velociraptor film. And the only thing they did was like build half of a velociraptor's tail that they just like wave like onto the camera, and then someone would just get pulled off camera, and then it was just over and over, and that's how they just killed everybody. And it's like that's what you usually get. Like that's the kind of like that's what I'm expecting from a monster project. Like I've been so conditioned to think that it is a filmmaker taking the easy way out, that when I see a monster project and I see something that goes, that's right, there are still people that care about this, and there are still people out there that can pull this off, and like it just washes over. Like it's such a comforting feeling, and like that's why like I loved living in that world as much as like that's weird to say. Like I like being trapped in there because like it's confined and it's weird and it's gonzo kind of horror kitchen sink shit. So like yeah, all for that.
Yeah, I love that, like, and I love that especially with the premise of this too, that it's like, okay, there's gonna be 3 monsters in this. How much of them are we even gonna actually see throughout this? And it's like, I like that it wasn't like formulaic either. I thought it was gonna be like the way that they did, like, they were doing the interviews and they just like kind of did one by one these like little interview sections. And I thought that's how it was going to be for like the set pieces as well. I figured like each one was going to get like one set piece and then just get killed and then kind of go to the next. But like the way that it's like, no, like we get multiple set pieces from like each monster where they kind of like keep going back and forth. Like, you know, they'll ditch the skinwalker for a minute, but then now it's like, oh, we're battling the vampire and the demon is also doing shit. And then like, and they like kind of go back and forth, and like it just like puts this like madcap on it. And then plus like, you know, we get to the end of the movie and like there was a cult that was boarding them in the house too, so it's like there's even a reason on why they like couldn't leave the house to begin with either. So it's like, again, they could have been formulaic with it, but like the way that they just like kept the pace going and like that haunted house aspect of like, okay, who's around the corner next is just so effective.
Even just one more before we get to the ending, just one little sequence where Devin, the main character, goes to a birthday party that we had mentioned before, and he sees his ex for the first time, and like neither of them have any reason to have a camera, but there needs to be a way for them to have a little like spat off in the corner by themselves. And the way they get around that is because, well, Devin's ex is like going to give a camera as a present, a GoPro basically, and she turns it on, and it's on to give to the person because she wanted to record the reaction. But first she has to go have this conversation, and it's just a small little detail that seems insignificant, but then again, you watch so many of these other like comparative in like micro budget found footage films, and they don't even go out of their way to like reason why the camera would be in some places, or even, sorry, not even micro budget. Like look at Paranormal Activity Next of Kin. Like it hates being a found footage horror film. Like it doesn't want to be, but it belabors itself with the rules of being one. So like you have these sequences where the camera is having like an out of body experience looking at the person recording, and you're like, that doesn't make sense. This is a found footage horror film. You've completely just negated the rules you've built. So like the fact that the Monster Squad, the Monster Project would take that little note and just be like, I know it's weird, but we just have to have a reason for this camera to be on, and they do. And like, guess what? Like, it's logical. It makes sense.
Yeah, and you talking about the little moments. One of the favorite little moments in the movie is there's a scene where the main character is being dragged away from a werewolf, and he's dragged down the hall and around a corner, and they close the door. And it's a 7 second, it's an 8 second shot. It's not like it's a tracking shot. They're not super calling attention to itself. But in the world of found footage, a 7 second shot is an incredibly long shot. That would be four different. That would be like shot and then around the corner shot. Like the fact that they took the time to do all of that in one take and actually get something that is meant to be just like an important little scene, not a flashy scene, but just something visually that information is best shown as one take. It's interesting. And it goes to show, looking around at Victor Mathau's career, one of the things he did after this is he made a series of VR horror films, 360 like experiential horror films. So no part of this movie makes that a surprise to me at all. This is a filmmaker who is already thinking about every perspective, every part of the filmmaking experience, and the leap to 360 makes complete sense for me.
I love that the detail of they made the skinwalker, he is a cop, so he has a body cam on him, so that way we can get these POV werewolves like shots, like just that little detail, so we could have that. Like that's what we need.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about the ending because, gang cult shit. Shout out to Anya Stanley. The ending of this film caught me by surprise in two different ways. It caught me by surprise by how it treats its characters, not unfavorably. I liked it. And it caught me by surprise with this sort of Lovecraftian cult that kind of came out of a little bit out of left field, but just sort of, again, DeVaughn, you've talked about how this just goes bigger and bigger and bigger. Like really, it blows the top off the movie in the last little bit. So DeVaughn, I kind of want to start with you. Reactions to the ending and how it all comes together, all these different experiences, all these character deaths, the big culmination, how that works for you.
Oh man, I remember the first time watching it, whenever I was like prepping to write an article about it. Like I watched it like early in the morning, so I mean I was like kind of half asleep, but I was like, that in bed watch. And then like I mean by the time this hit, like I mean I was ready to like go out and like run 5 miles after this movie. Like it like injected like so much energy into me. I was so excited that it goes into this, that because the filmmaker, he's secretly in some cult shit. And I love that, there's a funny line earlier in the movie, like when they're pulling up to location and the guy explaining why he has cameras, which again, explaining cameras in the movie.
Gotta love
And
it.
he's like, oh, kids breaking in, having sex, shooting up, sacrificing animals. And then they're like, wait, what? Sacrificing animals? He's like, oh yeah, some cult stuff, like whatever. And he like, it's buried in this funny line, and they just like kind of think it's like a weird throwaway thing, like, oh, this is weird. And then it's like, of course, like the caretaker is like in on the cult as well. They were the one, like, because they call attention to the hammering in the background, but nobody questions what it is. Like what's that sound like? It sounds like hammering, but nobody knows what's going on. That the cult was boarding them in. So it's like all these like little things, like, because if you're gonna have a twist like that, like the twist has to be fun, but then also, like, whenever I rewatched it this time and like knowing the twist, like, is the movie still fun? And it is, because it's like you see all these like little things, and like, I mean, you really kind of just like, all the characters look a little bit more dumb in hindsight, because they're like, man, Devin is a shady dude. Like, he has no production value on this like documentary he's making. Like, they brought 2 lights and a camera to this thing, and you're still buying in. Like, this dude was obviously setting some shit up. So it's like, on the hindsight, it just like kind of makes those actions like look a little bit funnier on the characters. But like, I was here for it when he's yelling at God at the ceiling during his cult ceremony. I was in.
I love that. Donato, ending for you.
Yeah, no, it sells in the same way. I also like the way it sells Devin's actions. Prior to, there are moments where you kind of go like, all right, why is everyone kind of just going along with him? And he's like being really kind of like, oh, so, like, he just brushes off the fact that nothing's gonna happen. It's just over and over again, like, who cares? Monsters aren't real. Like, it's just an overplaying of the fact that, like, no, we know we're going to get to a scene where there are monsters and they are real. So there's a little bit of fuzzy logic in the beginning, but what the ending does is it basically makes it a plot device. Like, that is a plot device of Devin saying, yeah, no, we're gonna, or sorry, like, I'm gonna, at Devin saying, I'm gonna get these people into a house and they're gonna be my sacrifices and everything that I need. And just giving him that motivation at the end, and like just showing kind of who he really is. It just helps the beginning of the film. It just helps the beginning of the film and the way it's structured and all things about that. So like, I think it's a clever ending more than just heaping on some occult shit at the end to get some demons going and to get some summoning going. And again, there's a pretty brutal death scene where like they drain somebody's blood, and all of that is very visual and very visceral and like real. But then the work it does to the prior stuff too in the film, I think it just is smart. It's just smart storytelling. And once again, found footage isn't really known for that kind of stuff. So when you do wrap things up in a way that ties earlier, little plot developments together in a way that makes sense, no, I'm in on it.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add to that is that if you're going to kill your characters, which a lot of horror films do, it needs to, at least for me, it needs to not feel overly cruel, right? Like that, not killing people for the sake of killing people because you think your audience is secretly rooting for the bad guys, which, to be fair, a lot of horror audiences are. But it also needs to have some sort of weight within the context of the film as well. And I think this movie does both of those things. Those are very, very heavy deaths, especially the death of why am I blanking on her name? Not Maureen, not Maudlin.
Muriel.
Muriel, thank you. The death of Muriel is a heavy death. The death of the main character, a heavy death. But it works within the context of the film. It doesn't seem overly cruel. This is not an Eli Roth movie, and it doesn't. It also doesn't, by giving it a cult thing at the end, it doesn't come across overly nihilistic, which a lot of horror can sometimes do. I think it's fun. It's good stakes. We're screwed because another YouTube influencer has become God, and I guess that's just what we have to deal with going forward.
Yeah. It makes it feel like it's like out of their control, like, like if you end it that way, that's like, okay, no matter what this character did, it was going to end this way. It does kind of lessen the blow a little bit, I guess. And yeah, I don't know. I really love that they went for it. And I love, because the guy that played Devin, like, his acting throughout the like first half is like kind of whatever, and then like you notice when you go back and rewatch this, you notice like when shit's kind of going down, he's not really saying much. He's just like kind of doing things. He's running around with people, but he's not really saying much. But then like when he like kind of flips his performance And Brian is like mad at him. He's like, you killed him. And he looks at his hands plainly and goes, do you see any blood on my hands?
Mm-hmm.
I was like, all right, you won me back, man.
It is a good bad guy performance in the end, for sure.
The context of just what it gives after we learn who he is and everything before that. It's a nice little kiss of like, this all makes sense now. It just all makes perfect sense. And it's nice to know. And also like moment of weakness, I'll just be like, yeah, no, the vampire's super attractive. So like I was always in on this movie. I was just in on this movie from the beginning. That's my type, whatever.
You like wide eyes and tattoos.
Absolutely.
I decided the perfect triple feature, and if you love this movie, because the two movies that this gives me shades of is one is Grave Encounters, which is one of my all-time favorite movies.
Great movie.
Very much feels the same, except I think Minahan's a little bit more of a clever writer than Methau here. But that one again, like kind of similar, the pacing, the isolated location, like it just kind of really works. And then a more recent one that this kind of has shades of is the Cleansing Hour. The one that was like found footage via live stream, where they're like having like a live stream exorcism. And along with the twist and everything, it definitely like goes to some places. So like make for a very fun found footage triple feature if you need a found footage movie night.
Yeah, and to what Monagle said before too, Deadstream, like when y'all can see Deadstream when it comes out on Shudder, that's going to be one that definitely plays with Monster Project. And
yeah, I'm excited for that one.
I'd also put Adam Green's Digging Up the Marrow, or Digging the Marrow, whatever that title is. It's just another freaky little creature feature found footage flick, and the way that it plays I think does play kind of with the Monster Project as well. So there's some more recommendations right there if you want to throw together a nice little found footage day.
No shortage of found footage recommendations out there. Well, that brings us to the last question of the podcast, the one we always end with, which is the legacy of this movie going forward. So right now, you can stream this movie for free on Tubi, only the greatest of all streaming platforms. I will go to my grave thinking that until they change their pricing structure or their acquisition model, in which case I'll abandon them. But for now, best streaming platform out there. You can watch it for free with just a few brief commercial introductions. It's weird to watch, as always, like a laundry detergent ad in the middle of this movie, but yeah, whatever. But there is a sequel that's theoretically in the works. The director he said in 2020, quote, that they are bringing certain cast members back and they're going to be introducing new monsters and that they hope to be working on it soon. I take any announcements made in 2020 with a huge fucking grain of salt, but at least it was on someone's radar not that long ago. So, legacy of this film, where fans are going to find it, where it deserves to be remembered. DeVaughn, let's start with you. Do you think this film is going to find its audience to the scope and scale that clearly we think it should?
I mean, I don't think that this movie is going to become like a cult classic or anything, but I definitely, because I've seen it over the years kind of pop up on more found footage lists and things like that. So I think it'll be the ones that, like, if you are a found footage person, that it will find its way to your eyeballs at some point. But I don't think this is going to be like a cult classic that people are like, very dedicated to and like clamoring more for. But I mean, I would take a sequel for this, like, maybe bring Brian back as a ghost in the next one. He's like haunting the house or something. Our boy Toby Hemingway from The Covenant, shout out to him.
I like it. Donato, what do you think?
Yeah, this is a tough one because I mean, it was distributed by Epic Pictures, so like it had a decent enough sized distributor, I think, that should have gotten the eyes on it that it might have deserved. I've seen it pop up on Amazon Prime. Like, it's funny because I've written about this throughout the years a few times, just on streaming lists and like saying, hey, you can watch this now on Amazon Prime. So like I'd throw it on there, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, you can now watch this on like Hulu really quickly or something like that. Like it's been around on a few different platforms. I think I go back to the idea that it might need a Shutter bump eventually, because I feel like this is really like a Shutter crowd. And if you can kind of get the right people watching this, maybe there can be some kind of readdress. Also, maybe down the line, I don't know, like one of those distributors, or maybe we talk about the Vinegar Syndromes and stuff like that. Maybe it gets a Blu-ray release down the line. That's another special edition. Like, hey, you missed this little thing that was pretty cool out there. But I think at the moment, like, everyone who's kind of seen it or would really enjoy it has seen it, and it just needs to keep plugging away on the streamers. I think that's the only way to do it.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of found footage because we have a lot of people that have guested on the show that love found footage, and I think that feels right to me. This is perfect fodder for friend of the show Megan Navarro's stay home watch horror listicles, things of
Right.
that nature, right? Like really good, highly curated lists of stuff that aren't just the titles you've seen. And eventually maybe it'll find its way onto bigger and better lists, and at that point
Mhm.
maybe the audience will grow a little bit for it. But I think in terms of a niche, 10 found footage films you haven't seen is a pretty good place for this to be, because it should be on all of them, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, totally fair.
All right, well, that is our episode on the Monster Project, or as Donato kept trying to call it, the Monster Squad.
It was one.
DeVaughn, I want to say thank you so much for joining us on the show. I want to give you an opportunity to not only promote your podcast, but socials, websites, things that you're maintaining. So if people want to learn more about about your show, or if they think that our show is just a little too straight edge and would like to take a walk on the wild side, what's the best place to go online to hear what you're doing?
Yeah, if you want to come get weird with us at the Bloody Blunt Cinema Club, we are on all platforms that you listen to podcasts, and you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Bloody Blunts Pod. We post new episodes every Tuesday. We just wrapped up covering the Slumber Party Massacre franchise, which was a lot of fun, and now we are
Yeah.
hopping into alien territory, and we're going to talk some alien horror movies, which will be super fun. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at _daddydisco. I'm there on Twitter talking movies, and on Instagram you can see some of the video things I do. I film some live performances and music videos with some friends and things like that. So yeah, follow me there.
Awesome. Donato, promote thyself, friend.
As always, you can find me, Matt Donato, at DonatoBomb on Twitter, Letterboxd, and Instagram. You will see my writing. Follow my live stream with Perry every Friday on Perry Nemirop's YouTube channel. Check out Certified Forgotten. We do cool stuff. And yeah, as always, just I will be posting what I do there. And if you like it, click on it. Yay.
We got to get you better at selling yourself, friend.
Whatever.
Especially with some of the bylines you've gotten recently. As for myself, you can follow me on Twitter at Matt Monagle. Like Donato said, that's where I post all of my writing, whether that's film criticism, tabletop criticism, which is my new baby. I'm having a lot of fun doing that. You can also definitely go check out our website, certifiedforgotten.com. Little plug related to this show. If you read interviews with Victor Mathau, he talks a lot about how The Hamiltons was a film that influenced him, which is a movie that we just featured. We just had a writer pitch us and write about The Hamiltons as a vampire movie. And I think that if you're interested in what those connections might be, that's a really good place to go, is visit certifiedforgotten.com and check out that article. It's still on our front page. And other than that, yes, if you liked what you listened to today, please leave us a review, a comment, a like, something to that effect. Go over to Bloody Blunts, leave some reviews. Like, this is what you're going to get there too. So definitely 5-star reviews all around. I think that's just the order of the day for everyone. And yeah, thank you for listening. DeVaughn, it's been a real pleasure. So great to have you on the show. And now that we've gotten one great movie out of your system, we'll have to have you come back and bring something else.
Oh, Matt, the pleasure has been all mine. Thank you so much.
Of course. And Donato is going to bring us out in our weird, organic, accustomed fashion.
It's the Monster Project, not the Monster Squad.
That's great. That's a footnote.